always going to have to fight our fears. But until we can control our fears, we can never fully love ourselves, and we can never fully love others like we should.
I am Judd Lienhard, former Army Ranger, college linebacker. I've been a strength and performance coach for over 15 years. Let's get into it.
I've come up with 7 basic fears. It's important that we understand the nature of our fears. So a lot of times our behavior and our lives are controlled by fear without us realizing it. These fears dominate our lives. All of these play directly into fitness as well as other areas of your life. The courage to take responsibility is one of the rarest traits in this world, and the urge to not take responsibility is one of the greatest driving factors in our behavior. You can't do anything in life without commitment, because each little commitment you make, it makes it harder and harder to go back. Just commit to the next thing. You're defined with what you do next, and you're defined by what you did with that failure. We have to face our enemy, and our enemy isn't other people. Our enemy isn't other ideologies or races. Our real enemy is the things that we're afraid of. Hate is not the opposite of love. Fear is. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the 7 fears, according to me. Now, a lot of people, they're going to have their own list of fears. Like if I asked you to give me a list of your fears, I'm sure it'd be different than mine. Common fears are like fear of death or, fear of public speaking, fear of divorce, fear of failure. And I got that. But, I think a lot about a lot of random shit that doesn't do me any good directly in life, but it helps me do monologues on my podcast. So I've thought a lot about fear, the nature of fear, and trying to, like I do with everything else in life, get to the essence of things. So based on that thinking that I've been doing, I've come up with 7 basic fears. And a lot of the other things that we think are fears are really the result of other deeper fears that I think are universal human fears. And, I think a lot of times it is important to understand the things we're up against fully so that we can battle those things. Just like, if you're going to defeat your enemy, you have to know your enemy, right? So I think it's important that we understand the nature of our fears, where they come from, what they are exactly, so that we can help keep ourselves from being controlled by our fears. And that's the thing. A lot of people, men especially, I think they pride themselves on being fearless, right? That they don't have any fear, but we all have fears. And, I think the difference is, do we let our fears control us? And here's the misconception with fear. I think when people think about fear, they picture, an intense, visceral reaction that's overwhelming. They can taste the fear in their mouth a little bit. And that does happen, but that's rare. It's rare in our life where we have that overwhelming, momentary, paralyzing type of fear. Fear is much more insidious than that. It's a gut feeling. It's a tug away from things. It's a caution. It works more by getting us to subtly avoid things than it does by stopping us cold and paralyzing us. It subtly affects our behavior. It sits on our shoulder and it whispers things to us instead of grabbing us to stop us more often than not, right? So that's how fear works. So a lot of times our behavior and our lives are controlled by fear without us realizing it. So I think it's important first let's start to label our fears, to know what we're truly afraid of and the nature of those fears. So I have 7 fears, okay? And they're in no particular order. So the first fear is the fear of suffering, okay? We use suffering interchangeably with pain quite often, but they're not quite the same thing. So there's a lot of different types of pain, emotional, physical, and things like that. But pain is unavoidable in life. Suffering is not. Now, it's hard to avoid suffering. None of us probably actually completely avoid it. But some of us suffer more than others, and it's not always directly correlated to the amount of pain that we endure, because pain is a good thing. Pain is a teacher. It teaches us what works. It teaches us what doesn't. When we endure physical and emotional pain, that experience, if handled properly, can make us more empathetic to other people, so we can become a better servant and mentor to them. Pain teaches us, and pain's there for a reason. It teaches us not to touch hot stove. It teaches us not to do stupid shit all the time. Suffering, it's pervasive in life, but it's not beneficial. It's definitely not mandatory, and it's definitely not beneficial. So suffering comes in three forms, basically: past, present, and future. So in its past form, suffering comes in the form of regret or embarrassment, all right? Present form, it comes in the form of longing or frustration, okay? Future form, it comes in the form of anxiety or worry or fear, of the future. So anxiety or worry. So none of that is necessary. So fundamentally, suffering is different than pain. And we're afraid to suffer. We're not afraid of pain necessarily. We're afraid of the things, the emotional reactions that pain will bring with it, okay? A lot of us endure pain willingly quite often, but we avoid suffering like the plague. Instead of learning what suffering really is, so that we can learn that suffering is not necessary. It's not a necessary component of pain, all right? So that's the first fear, is suffering. We're afraid to suffer. But if we learn to manage our thoughts, put things into context, forgive ourselves, focus on what we can control, and understand and not worry about things we cannot control, understanding what worrying is essential and what is not, then right there, our suffering will be greatly reduced. So one of the techniques I use to reduce my own suffering, first of all, I take accountability, which means I take ownership, and then I forgive myself. I'd let things go. Secondly, I do something called edge thinking. So that basically, in its short form, is I try to focus on inside and outside edge thoughts and stay away from the middle. Now, what does that mean? Inside edge thoughts are like action thoughts. In the moment, completely immersed. What can I affect right now? What matters in this moment? Living in the moment, good or bad, right? Outside edge thoughts, which are also okay, are big level thoughts. It's dreams, hopes, plans, being curious, thinking about the bigger picture, right? So it's, I equate it like being on a snowboard or a wakeboard. Usually you're in control when you stay on the inside or outside edge of that board. But when you get in the middle is when you kind of lose control and things don't feel stable. So the middle thoughts are more the thoughts of things that are neither right here nor big picture, but things that aren't here that I can't control. Like, what is my ex-girlfriend doing? What do these people think about me? What happens if? Like, none of that I can control. So it's hard to control this if you don't think about what you're thinking about. I know it sounds weird, but literally I do things called thought check-ins where I use the number 3. So whenever I see the number 3, whenever I can, I use that as a cue for me to do a thought check-in and basically think about what I'm thinking about. Because I think we have 70 thoughts in a day and we're just unaware of most of them. But those thoughts are very powerful and they affect our behavior on any given moment. So when I do a thought check-in, if I'm thinking about middle thoughts, I make it a point to just let those thoughts go. I go back to the moment, or I go back to big picture thoughts. And over time, that'll make a huge difference in your life and you'll stop suffering quite as much. All right, so moving on here. So the second fear number 2, to know. We're afraid to know. So this is an area where a lot of people get confused with failure. We're not necessarily afraid to fail. We're afraid to know that we're not good enough. And here's another thing. All these fears are tied together like a spider web. One fear will strengthen another one, but if you can conquer one fear, it's like you clip one strand of that spider web and the spider web starts to fall apart. So this fear is connected to a later fear, responsibility, but the fear of knowing. Because once we know, then we are responsible for that. If you know that you're not good enough, you either have to accept the fact that you're not good enough or take accountability, responsibility to make yourself good enough. But as long as we don't know, we're not responsible. We're afraid to know. That's why we don't test ourselves on a regular basis. It's not always because the test is hard. It's because the test will take away the comfort we find in just not knowing. If there's an uncertainty there, then there's always a possibility that we are good enough. We don't feel like we're not held accountable. So we're just afraid to know. We're afraid to know what we need to do. We're afraid to know what somebody else wants from us because then we are responsible. Then we have to make a choice whether to do that or not. if you do something and you fail at it, then it leaves you with a choice. Do I accept the fact I'm not good, or do I work harder to get better? And then that puts the onus on us to do the work, So knowing comes with a lot of responsibility and accountability, and we're often afraid to know. All right. I think Plato said, am I paraphrasing? It's easy to forgive a child for being afraid of the dark. It becomes a tragedy when a man is afraid of the light. It's one of my favorite quotes, and he's right. I mean, Plato's right about a lot of things, but that's right. I mean, it's like children are the ones that it's forgivable to be afraid of what's in the dark and what they can't see. But it's unforgivable for men to not seek the truth, whether it's their own capability or whether it's a truth in the world, because there are universal truths out there. And the more perspective we can get, the more research we do, the more curious we are, the closer we're going to get to knowing and understanding that universal truth. It's like one of those diminishing curves. You never quite reach the bottom, so we can never quite know the whole truth. But the more we try, the more different perspectives we get, the more we seek knowledge, the closer we get to understanding that universal truth. And a lot of us are afraid to know because it makes us uncomfortable. It puts responsibilities on us. Maybe it convicts us to change our beliefs or who we hang out with. And it's better to just not know. I've been in arguments with a lot of people, and once I start arguing facts with them that they can't refute or aren't afraid to refute, that challenges their preconceived notions or things they'd like to believe, they don't show curiosity. It's uncomfortable for them, and they shut down the conversation, change the subject, or use some logical fallacies against me or something, because I can tell they're getting afraid because I'm challenging their beliefs, and it makes them uncomfortable. So that's a fear. All right, moving on. Number 3, and this sounds contradictory, but 2 things can be true. We're also afraid of the unknown. So we like certainty. We like to know what's coming next. We're not really afraid of death. We're afraid because we don't know what comes after death. We're not afraid to start a business. We're afraid because there's uncertainty there. We don't know that it'll succeed. We're afraid to get into a new relationship. And this ties into other fears we have, like commitment, things like that. We're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid. It brings what I talk about to bear with that uncertainty, that anxiety of what's coming next. As long as we can have some certainty, even if it's a certainty in an unhappy future, as long as there's certainty there, it gives us a feeling of contentment. So we don't make changes. We don't take risks, not because we're afraid to fail. We're afraid because we don't know if we're going to succeed. We want to know the distance. So, when I was in infantry officer basic course, it was actually a really good course. I learned a lot there. So, you have to go to your officer candidate school, and then you go to I think we went to BOLIC 2, which is like a leadership course. And then we went to infantry officer basic school. And then after that, Ranger school and airborne, all that shit. But it's a good school. It's a long school. And, one of my instructors was sadistic. I mean, he's good, but he was just brutal. And the dude was I think he was a triathlete. So he's in crazy good shape, right? And we go on these long runs, and Fort Benning, the housing units there are massive, and they're built in this hollow square that is more than a mile around the perimeter of these things. It takes forever. And we would run up the hill, Cardiac Hill. Everybody that's been at Fort Benning, I don't know what Fort Benning's called now, but it used to be called Fort Benning, knows about Cardiac Hill. So we're tired and we smoked it, and we know we're running back towards our barracks. But he would do this thing as we get close to the entrance of the barracks where he would slow down, and we'd all get anxiety because he might turn in and the run be over, or he might keep going. And if he keeps going, we know we got at least one more mile, but we don't know how many more, because he had been known to do it 2 or 3 times and just add 2 or 3 miles to the run. And at the time, I was like, this dude's a dick. You know what I mean? But looking back, it's no, because he was teaching us a valuable lesson, because in the military, the missions don't have known distances. You don't know when the mission will end, and missions get extended. Things pop up. So he's trying to teach us, I hope, because it's pretty good, that we didn't know when the run was going to end. We had to become comfortable with that fear of the unknown distance. Because if he didn't turn in and we knew, and he told us immediately we only have one more lap, we would be good with it. But he didn't tell us. We had to guess, and we had to just keep running, not knowing when we could stop. And when you start a business, you might be confident that it will succeed, but you don't know how many hiccups there's going to be. You don't know how many setbacks, and you don't know how long it's going to be till it succeeds. So we're not afraid of failure. We're afraid of the unknown. right? All right, moving on. So far we have 2 fears covered, or 3 fears, right? Yeah, so we have suffering, the known, and the unknown. All right, fear number 4, responsibility. It gives us comfort when we know that we are not the ultimate source of success or failure. Everybody wants to be in charge. Everybody has to have power, but there's a reason we avoid it, because of responsibility. Because if shit fails, it's on us. And this ties into the other things, suffering and to know and the unknown, all of that. We are afraid to take responsibility. That's why we make excuses. We don't like things being on our shoulders. We don't like to be the one that has, most of us, that has the ball in our hands as the clock winds down. We like to do our part, know that we contributed, but also know that at the end of the day, the win, we contributed to the win. Maybe we didn't play our best, and that's when we contributed to the loss, but we weren't ultimately responsible for it, and we're afraid of responsibility. So, like, the courage to take responsibility is one of the rarest traits in this world, and the urge to not take responsibility is one of the greatest driving factors in our behavior. Whether it's own up to what we did, own up to where we are, volunteer to lead something, or to take lead in something that might not succeed, because that ties into another fear, several other fears actually, the unknown, the known, isolation, commitment. It ties into all those other fears. We're afraid that if we are a failure, we'll be judged and we'll be isolated. We're afraid that our ego will take a hit, and maybe we'll know that we're not as good as we thought we were, or we'll find out that we're not up to the task. So, nothing great has ever been accomplished without somebody taking responsibility and just owning up. So, if you find yourself hesitant to start something, ask yourself why, and get comfortable not knowing when something will end. Get comfortable knowing that ultimately it will be on you, win or lose, and just trust and believe in yourself. Like, I'm a Christian, I have faith, so I ask for God's help to give me the confidence and to give me the endurance to keep going and to protect those that depend on me. But part of being a man in this world, and I'm speaking to men here, and women too, but I'm speaking to men, is being willing to take responsibility, both of things that have happened and things that will, most importantly, will happen in the future. And at the end of the day, whether you're a success or a failure, all of that is temporary. You're not a failure. All you did was fail. That doesn't make you a failure, because you're defined with what you do next, and you're defined by what you did with that failure. And honestly, if we always avoid the unknown, if we always insist on, if we're afraid to know how good we are, if we're afraid to take responsibility, then we will by definition be a failure, because the people that are guaranteed to fail are people obviously that never try to succeed. So moving on. Fear number 5, commitment. We're afraid of commitment. Commitment means all in. Commitment means that there's no turning back, right? It means giving your word. Because before we reach that threshold, you can change your mind, and that's not failure. It's not going back on your word. It's just, I decided to take a different path. It gives us an out. But once we commit to something, then it's either, if we don't follow through, then we're either liars or we're failures in our minds, right? So we're afraid of commitment. Like, especially when I was younger, I kind of had a fear of heights. And we had this swimming pool, and the diving board is probably 12 feet in the air, but that thing may as well have been 20 stories in there. I may as well have been cliff diving, right? And when people say face your fears, I think there's this false notion that when you face your fears one time and you don't die and you succeed, then that fear goes away. But that's not how it works. We have to face our fears over and over again until the fear starts to go away. And then it's always there a little bit, right? So I was afraid of heights. All of my friends were going off the diving board. And I'm not going to be my only friend, the only one there not to go off the diving board. So I would walk up to the diving board, and the most fearful point for me wasn't even standing. It wasn't diving into the water, because then I knew what was going to happen. There's nothing I can do. It's been put in motion. It wasn't even standing on the edge of the diving board, even though that was a fearful moment too. The biggest moment of fear for me was when it came from walking up to the diving board to putting my first foot on that ladder, because I knew then that there was no going back. That if I walked away then, especially if I had waited in line to get to that moment, and once I got to that first step, then it was obvious to everyone around, because I'm afraid of isolation, we'll get to that in a minute, that I was afraid. All right. Before that moment, there was always an out. If there was no line and I was walking up to the ladder, I could just walk right past the ladder. I didn't make that commitment. So they didn't know. Maybe I was going to get something from the snack bar, or going to jump in the other end of the pool. Or if I was waiting in line and I got out of line, maybe I had to go to the bathroom. Like, nobody knows. But when you put your foot on that ladder, once you take it off, then they'll know. That first foot was me making the commitment. That was the thing I was the most afraid of, was that first step on the ladder. Right. And my biggest fear, there were other fears involved, was the commitment. I was afraid to commit. And the thing is, you can't do anything in life without commitment. We know this, right? But that's a fear of ours. It's a fear that needs to be identified. One of my favorite movies, it's not a very famous movie, but it's one of my all-time favorite movies, is Gattaca. I'm kind of into sci-fi. I think it was Matt Damon in it. Maybe not. But anyway, it's a dystopian future type of movie where they use like genetic engineering to make like superhumans, right? So most people are these genetically modified people. So they, have faster reflexes, they have better genetic profiles and physical profiles. And, they don't suffer from disease. So Matt Damon was in a family that, when the family was poor, he's the older brother, he was a natural born baby. So basically they discriminate against natural borns in the future. His younger brother, because once his family got more money, I think, wasn't, because they could afford to have his younger brother genetically engineered. And all growing up, his younger brother would beat him at everything, especially swimming. And his younger brother beat him time after time, until one day, he's telling the story, let me back up a little bit, because he was an astronaut. And to become an astronaut, they discriminate against natural born. He had to hide who he really was. So he had taken a genetically modified human that had been injured in a diving accident, paralyzed, and he used his DNA. And it's really cool how he did it and all that stuff. But he's telling a story to somebody about his childhood. And he always wanted to be an astronaut. That was his dream. But he's racing his brother. They would do these races into the ocean where they'd swim out to a buoy and back, and his brother always beat him, right? It's I always remember this story and think about it. One day, he beat his brother against all odds, and his brother was astounded. And when they got back to the beach, exhausted, his brother was like, "How did you do that?" And he said, "I just didn't save anything for the swim back." He risked everything. He fully committed. And it was astounding to me. It's like, man, that's what he did. He committed. He didn't save anything for the trip home, because we always want to save something. We always want to hold back. And then if we fail, it's not really failure. It's like, I just decided to do something different. But if you commit and you go all in and you fail, it's not like you're really afraid of like losing your home and your family. You're afraid of the isolation and the responsibility that comes along with that failure. You're afraid of commitment. So, the next time you're hesitant to do something, like, it might, like, put your first foot on that ladder. Don't give yourself a choice to back out. I always tell people that are struggling to work out, like, you don't have to go work out. Just put your fucking shoes on. And then once your shoes are on, get in the car. Because every little commitment you make makes it harder for you to turn around. It's hard. When you're sitting on a chair and you have the choice to go work out, you can decide not to. But when you put your shoes on, which takes very little effort, you have to look at yourself and, I've made the commitment to put my shoes on. Now I have to actually take them off. And then once you go sit in the car with your shoes on. Then if you change your mind, then you actually have to get out of the fucking car, go take your damn shoes off, sit back on the couch. People don't like to do that. And then drive to the gym. None of this takes effort. If you were told that you can get in amazing shape just by putting your shoes on and driving to the gym, everyone would do that, right? None of that takes much effort. But once you get to the gym, you're not even telling yourself you have to do a hard workout. Just get to the gym. Then walk in the gym. Because each little commitment you make, it makes it harder and harder to go back. And then when you go to work out, don't do your first exercise. Do the first warm-up set of your first exercise. And then look in the mirror. And then every point you can say, do I want to quit now? No, because it gets less and less likely. Just commit to the next thing. Just run full speed to the middle. Is another thing I like to say. Don't run the full race. Run full speed to the middle. because then you have to quit in the middle, and it's equal distance back and it's equal distance forward. So you may as well just keep going forward, just run full distance to the middle. We're all mentally weak. I think some of us lie to ourselves and say that we're not, but we're not. And we have to break things down into manageable pieces. Maybe I'm just extraordinarily mentally weak, because to this day, even though I love to work out, some days I don't want to work out and I just have to put my fucking shoes on. I just have to run to the middle. That's all I have to do. I have to get to the middle. And then I'm left with a choice, because it's going to be just as hard to go back as it is to finish. So anyway, I've harped on that enough. Afraid of commitment. All right, so I've hinted at these other ones. We're afraid of isolation. Man's biggest fear is to be alone. And I'm sorry if you disagree with that, but it's none of us like to. Sometimes we want to be physically isolated. I know I do. We don't want to be socially isolated. We don't want to be castigated. That's why we're so afraid of judgment. That's why we're so afraid of taking risks, because part of failure is the judgment that comes along. That's why we're afraid of public speaking, because if we get up there and we don't do well, first of all, we're up there alone, so we have full responsibility. We have to make commitment to go onto that stage. 2 huge fears. And then we're afraid of isolation. If we don't do well, we have everyone in the place looking at us, judging us, and we never feel more isolated than we do if we bomb a speech. All right? Put on the spot. And that is where the root of public speaking comes from. So, I can talk about ways to get over public speaking. I don't love to public speak either. But, you picture yourself, you have information that these people need, and I'm going to give it to them because I want to serve these people. My desire to serve these people is stronger than my fear of being isolated if I don't serve them well by giving a good speech. So, people think that people that love or don't mind public speaking is because they're full of themselves and they have enormous amounts of confidence. Maybe that's the case. Other people, I think, they believe so strongly in what they have to say, and they have such a desire to serve other people that they're willing to risk being isolated to get up there and tell these people what they need to hear, to give that motivational speech, or to convey this knowledge that they have and that they need. And that matters more than you being cool or them judging you. You're willing to risk their judgment to help them. And that's love. Right there is to willing to risk pain, fear, suffering, isolation in order to serve other people. That's one of the purest forms of love. We're always afraid of being isolated. We're afraid of being different. That's why people don't make courageous decisions to do the right thing, even if it takes no physical effort on their part, because they're afraid of people's judgment. That's why people don't stick up for people being bullied as often as they should, because then they'll join that bull. That's why bullying is so terrible, because it's not just the physical or, it's the isolation that person experienced. And then people don't stand up for people being bullied because they're afraid too. They're afraid of being isolated. I read a book, I think it's called The Blood Lens, and it's about like World War II, the Eastern Front, like kind of behind the front lines and all the atrocities the Nazis committed. And, there's a myth, and I think it was perpetrated, not perpetrated, but they perpetrated a lot too, but perpetuated by ex-Nazis after the war, that if they didn't participate in these crimes against humanity, they risked physical harm and having their families physically harmed. And the more they looked into it and researched and actually started reading some of the Nazi official language, that just wasn't the case. Like if, you lined up civilians and one of the soldiers chose not to shoot, it didn't make practical sense for the Nazi to execute that soldier or torture his family, because that would undermine morale at home. It would undermine unit cohesion, and they needed the manpower. They couldn't afford to execute a Nazi just because he wouldn't commit a war crime. What they would do is they would remove him from that unit. But those men, who weren't all monsters to begin with, even though they did monstrous things, were so afraid of isolation from their peers, so afraid of being perceived as weak, that they would literally murder women and children out of that fear of isolation. And we can judge them all we want, but I honestly don't feel like most Americans would be that much different. I really don't. I don't feel like there's a genetic difference in human beings born in Germany compared to those born in America. I feel like Americans are just as capable of doing and committing atrocities as the Germans were in World War II. I think the things that hold us together are our commitment to our national values and our Constitution and good leadership, which we're lacking right now. But on an individual basis, I see Americans do things that are horrible because they're afraid of isolation on smaller scales than that, obviously, I could very easily see them doing it on a larger scale. And it's not because they hated these people. They may have been indoctrinated and made to feel that these people were subhuman in some way. But I didn't sense, based on listening to their interviews, I'm a pretty big history buff, that they felt a lot of hatred in their hearts for these people. What they felt was fear. And everybody thinks that hate and love are at opposite ends of the spectrum. I know it's a cliche, thin line between love and hate, but they're right. It's not hate and love. It's love and fear. Fear is on the opposite end of the spectrum from love, because we have to be brave to love fully and rightly. We cannot love humans the right way if we're dominated by our fears. And that's why I'm spending so long talking about these fears today. It's not just because I know it'll help you succeed in life and live a fuller life, but I know it'll help you to serve people. You're not afraid to know. You're not afraid to learn and be curious. You're not afraid to take responsibility. You're not afraid to risk isolation to do the right thing. You're not afraid to commit yourself to another human being. These are the fears that don't just ruin our own lives. They're the fears that hurt our society and leave us feeling less happy and joyful than we could. It's because of fear. So anyway, that was the sixth fear. So, we've gone over suffering, to know, the unknown, commitment, isolation, responsibility. So the seventh fear is the fear of frustration. Okay. We don't mind doing hard things. The hardest thing to do in life is not to do a hard thing. It's to do a hard thing, fail, and do it over again with enthusiasm. So Winston Churchill said, the key to success is to go from failure to failure with enthusiasm. It's a beautiful statement, and I wholeheartedly agree. We hate doing things and feeling like we're not getting better, and it's wasted effort. We want to know if we're going to do a hard thing, we're going to see a return from doing that hard thing at a known and predictable timeline and a known and predictable level of improvement. We want to know that if I do so many sets of so many reps and run so much distance at so much intensity, that I will improve by this amount. And a lot of times, because the variance of humans and injuries, you just can't promise people that. People want promises. They want promises that their effort is going to be returned with a reward, okay? And that's just not how life works. And even if you're guaranteed to succeed eventually, there's no guarantee that you're going to succeed at a certain level on a certain timeline. So it's both the unknown and it's the frustration of putting in the hours and then looking over and seeing other people that you may think didn't, that are doing it better, getting it faster. We hate being frustrated. Why? Because it makes us feel helpless. It makes us feel like we're not in control. It makes us feel like we're less than. We are afraid of frustration. We're afraid of frustration that, we can't make things end, or that we can't get the person we want or the job we want. And just all our efforts are for naught. We hate wasted effort. My son loves building Legos, and, every time a Lego breaks or something happens and he has to start over, he gets frustrated, right? He's afraid of having to do all that effort again. And I tell him it's the same way with writing. And I told him the story to help relate to him. I was like, every time I would write something back in the day and I hit save and it didn't save, I would get frustrated, because I'm like, all of that effort was for nothing. How am I going to replicate this again? But without fail, every time that happened, I would write it again and it would be way better than the first time. And so every time my son's Legos would break, I'd be like, this is a good thing, because now you get a chance to do it over. Now you get a chance to practice it, and I promise you it's going to be better, because something, you may have thought it was perfect, but there's something that if you got another chance to do it, you could see it from another light. You could use all of that experience, and the next time is going to be better. Trust me. And it always was. And I'd point it out to him. See, you put in the work, you fought through your frustration, and now it's better. But we're afraid to go through that process of frustration. So, yeah, I mean, I used to have this like recurring nightmare. I think it's pretty common. It's one of my least favorite dreams. And my friends and I are running through like a storage unit, I guess. And we were being chased by a gorilla. And we can't see it, but we can see a shadow and we know he's behind us, right? And we run to our bikes. And I think it's like when I think it's when I was an adolescent and I was getting bullied a little bit, or just everybody gets bullied at that age. It's just a horrible age. You treat each other. And all my friends get on their bikes and they take off, and I get on my bike and I fall over and I can't ride it. And it's not even the fear of the gorilla. I think the gorilla is probably a metaphor for something. It was two things. It was my feeling of isolation, my friends left me, and it was the frustration that they can ride a bike and I can't. And no matter how hard I tried, I just kept falling over. And it seemed like the harder I tried, the worse it got. So that's like a recurring nightmare for me. And it's just two fears: isolation, frustration. And maybe the gorilla, was even more frightful because you couldn't see the gorilla. You could just see a shadow. So there was that unknown factor there too. The hint of something bad. You could see, evidence that something bad was coming, but you just didn't know what it was. So the unknown, and I didn't turn around to look at the gorilla. So maybe I was afraid to know what he looked like. And these fears dominate our lives. And I know I'm a fitness guy, but all of these play directly into fitness as well as other areas of your life. We're afraid to suffer, and we don't understand the difference between pain and suffering. We're afraid to take responsibility. We're afraid to commit to things. We're afraid to really know how good we are or where we need to work. We're afraid of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen next in life. We don't know if we're going to hurt ourselves if we do this new weight that we want to try. We're afraid of commitment. We're afraid to say, yes, I'm going to do this 12-week program, and I'm not going to drink, and I'm not going to eat junk food, because after that, once you commit, it's failure. It's not just changing your mind. We're afraid of the frustration of going through the whole 12 weeks, and all of our other friends have 12 packs or 8 packs or whatever, and we still got a little gut roll, or, I went through all the same 2-a-days as my friends, and they're starting, and I'm not. I'm frustrated. Those are our fears. And you may have other fears you've identified, but I've thought a lot about all of my other fears, and they all relate to these 7 core fears. And, we have to face our enemy, and our enemy isn't other people. Our enemy isn't other, ideologies or races or people of different socioeconomic backgrounds. Our real enemy is the things that we're afraid of. And like I said, and I'll say one more time, hate is not the opposite of love. Fear is. And until we can conquer our fears, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be afraid anymore. We will always be afraid. We're always going to have to fight our fears. But until we can control our fears, we can never fully love ourselves, and we can never fully love others like we should. But anyway, that's all I have to say, and hope you all have a good day.